This time on Versus, I take a look at what is hands down the biggest nerd war that has ever existed. Star Wars vs. Star Trek, a sci-fi battle of epic proportions. From Dagobah to Vulcan, I'm going to be looking at everything from both of these fantastic sci-fi franchises to determine which is the better of the two. Both have tons of movies, as well as TV shows, comic books, novels, and video games. One takes a fantasy approach to its futuristic universe, and the other takes a more scientific approach. One is about constant war and good versus evil, and the other is about trying to make the universe a peaceful place and understanding that there is no evil, just different points of view. There's a lot to cover, so let me get things started by going over the incredible Star Wars franchise first. Star Wars was originally a single movie about a foster boy who ends up in the middle of a galaxy-wide conflict between the evil Galactic Empire and the Rebel forces. After purchasing 2 droids that were salvaged from a Rebel capital ship, his foster family is killed and he becomes a wanted civilian in the eyes of the Empire. He meets an old Jedi Knight named Ben Kenobi who teaches him the ways of a mysterious power known as the Force and ends up teaming up with the Rebels in their efforts against the Empire. Filled with shootouts, lightsaber battles, and space battles, the original Star Wars was something people had never really seen before on this large of a scale. After the success of the original Star Wars, it was decided that this would be a 3-part saga. The original trilogy included the original Star Wars, which was now named A New Hope. The sequel to that was The Empire Strikes Back, which in my opinion was the best Star Wars film ever made. Then Return of the Jedi was made to finish off the epic saga. The original trilogy had everything, including western-like bar shootouts, fantasy-like lightsaber battles, action-packed chase scenes, both space and air dogfights with the various different spaceships and land cruisers. The Star Wars mythology is extremely vast, and there's a character and story for everyone. After the successful re-release of the original trilogy, a prequel trilogy was in the works. The prequel trilogy told the story of a young slave named Anakin Skywalker and his journey to become a Jedi, and eventually becoming one of the greatest villains of all time, the Sith Lord Darth Vader. Anakin's story filled the fans with hype. They had already seen his son Luke's story and his confrontation with Darth Vader, but the story of how a powerful young Jedi would become an evil Sith ruler was far more promising. Disappointingly, it ended up as a failure in the eyes of the fans. With Episode 1 targeting children more than adults, it was nice for the parents who had grown up with the original trilogy to take their kids to see these new stories on the big screen. But by dumbing down the plot and adding in characters for sheer goofiness, even the new young fans felt let down by the end of Episode 2. However, the prequel trilogy did show the Jedi in a better light. They were far more acrobatic and the lightsaber fights were far more interesting, especially when Force powers came into play. Besides the movies, the Star Wars stories spanned across comic books, novels, and video games. The comics by Dark Horse were nothing short of spectacular. Some sagas were just as good as the original trilogy flicks. The novels started to get a little ridiculous when they started writing about the main characters from the original trilogy's children's adventures. The video games were all in all pretty successful, especially the Super Star Wars games on the Super Nintendo, the Rogue Squadron games on the PC and Nintendo 64, the Dark Forces / Jedi Knight games, the X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter games, and of course the Battlefront games. Star Wars' current situation is iffy. They're currently working on the CG Clone Wars TV series, which is sort of a remake of the animated Clone Wars TV shorts, which in my opinion were far better. The Clone Wars is a good story, but sadly it does not compare to the original trilogy. So in a way, Star Wars has been on the decline since the Return of the Jedi. Now for the other competitor, the deep, fascinating, and technologically inspiring Star Trek franchise. Star Trek started out as an hour-long TV series about a Federation capital ship called the USS Enterprise and its crew. The show focused more on its crew and the exploration of space than it did on action, which is why some Star Wars fans will never be Star Trek fans. But the series covers a bunch of different situations that any of us can relate to. The show wasn't just about being in the future or being in space. It was about being a good person and dealing with the everyday and unique problems that arise. The Enterprise crew is set on tons of different missions that range from trying to make a mining deal with a newfound planet, to investigating a gigantic planet and ship-eating machine. They end up on planets that aren't as advanced as ours, gangster planets, planets with evolved beings on it, planets with living gas aliens, and even a planet with a Greek god on it. The adventures were seemingly endless, and with a lively and well thought out cast, it makes for an entertaining and knowledgeable experience. There was a character for everyone. The logical scientist Vulcan, Spock, the best friend of the captain and primary doctor of the ship, Dr. McCoy, the easily exciting engineer Scotty, the calm fencing pilot Sulu, and the attractive communications operative Uhura. The original series spawned 6 films, 5 of them being fairly successful, and still stand up well today. The later films involve more humor as the characters are aged and retired, but they still have all the intensity and excitement of the original series. The original films were so successful that Hollywood has recently reinvented them in a new Star Trek movie that features the same characters, but younger and in an alternate universe, which the movie itself actually explains. After the original series, they made an animated series that told more stories of the original characters from the USS Enterprise. Years afterwards, the Star Trek universe was re-entered a few years further into the future with Star Trek: The Next Generation, with a completely different cast of characters and an updated USS Enterprise. The Next Generation was probably the most successful of all the TV series, and also spawned itself some movies. The Next Generation films range from excellent to just plain horrible, but it was another Star Trek saga that was a huge success. Before The Next Generation got to finish, a new TV series was aired alongside it. The show was Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and it changed things up a bit by taking place on a space station instead of a capital ship. Many fans consider this the best of the Treks, as it has some of the best characters in the Star Trek franchise, as well as different situations than you'd find on a ship, and more action than the previous series. It even has a few crossovers with The Next Generation. The Star Trek franchise never seemed to get as good as it was in this era, with Voyager still being great, but not standing out as well on its own, and Enterprise being a huge disappointment for many fans. As far as other media goes, Star Trek has some decent novels, yet some not so decent comic books. The video games, on the other hand, range from horrible to awesome. The Bridge Commander and Elite Force games were great on the PC, but the Star Trek games on home console are pretty much all terrible. Currently, Star Trek is once again back on top of the world, with its recent movie reinvention and the sequel to that film in the works. So now you've heard a bit about both sides of the battle. Both are incredible science fiction franchises with huge followings, but only one can come out on top. Who will it be? There's only one way to find out.
Star Wars is way better!
No, Star Trek's better!
You're a big nerd!
You're a bigger nerd!
I have a helmet, let's rock, paper, scissors!
Alright, let's rock, paper, scissors for it! Oh, damn!
I can't see very well.
Oh, eat shit!
I don't like the taste
Oh! Oh, shit, best out of 5! Oh! Oh!
You're on to me!
You suck! Oh my god! Whoa! It's a gun! Oh shit! It's terror! Ooh, look at the 400 fuck all for ya!
That's right, folks, I couldn't choose between the two, so instead I picked my favorite sci-fi franchise of all time, Gundam, to be the victor. Happy April Fool's Day, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video.
This helmet hurts my noggin.